One father? Three bloodlines? Why have the descendants of Abraham killed each other for over 2,000 years beneath the scorching sun of the Middle East? There is a single historical and mythological figure revered by over half the globe as the patriarch of nations. To the Jews, he is the founding father of the covenant. To Christians, he is the ultimate paradigm of faith. To Muslims, Ibrahim is a humble prophet who built the Kaaba. Despite making up more than half of the world's population, the followers of these three religions are, in essence, brothers living under the same roof. They worship the same invisible God and share the same moral foundation. Yet, the history of the last 2 millennia is a relentless chain of bloody crusades, the horrific tragedy of the Holocaust, and the endless Israel-Palestine conflict. Why can't people who call the same man Father sit at the same table? Why has the Holy Land of Jerusalem become a mass grave for millions? Is it because they are too different? Or is it precisely because they are too similar, breeding a deadly monopoly on the truth? In today's video, we aren't here to judge which religion is right or wrong. We are going to perform a historical autopsy on the roots of the Abrahamic family to untangle the knots of millennia-old hatred, from the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey to the arrival of the Messiah and the final prophet. We will uncover how faith was weaponized and how devotion morphed into a sword. This is not just a story about religion. It is the story of humanity's greatest tragedy, when your closest kin becomes your sworn enemy. Welcome back to Open Knowledge. We believe that understanding is the first step toward reconciliation. If you want to pierce through the superficial news cycles and see the complex reality of our world, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's rewind 4,000 years to where the promise of Abraham began, the dawn of monotheism. To understand the tsunamis of hatred that have swept the Middle East, we must discard shallow news reports and travel back to the sun-drenched lands of Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago. Before Abraham, the world was steeped in polytheism. Humanity bowed to clay idols and capricious gods of nature. Abraham emerged not just as a patriarch, but as a massive ideological revolutionary. He was the first to proclaim faith in a single, invisible, and omnipotent God. From this monotheistic belief, a covenant was struck between the Creator and humanity. The promise was specific. Abraham's descendants would outnumber the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, and they would be granted an eternal homeland, Canaan. However, the very cradle of this hope contained the seeds of a profound bloodline tragedy. The conflict didn't start between rival nations. It started right in Abraham's tent, between two women and two sons carrying opposing destinies. Two sons, two destinies. The Isaac narrative, Judaism and Christianity. The covenant centers on Isaac, the son of Abraham, and his primary wife, Sarah. Born miraculously in their old age, Isaac is the child of the promise and the sole legitimate heir to the covenant of the land of Israel. The Jews view themselves as the direct descendants of Isaac, the chosen people, tasked with upholding God's law. The Ishmael narrative, Islam. Before Isaac, Abraham had a firstborn son, Ishmael, with Hagar, an Egyptian servant. Islamic tradition holds that Ishmael is the true heir and the prophet who helped his father build the Kaaba in Mecca. The climax of this spiritual inheritance dispute is the binding on Mount Moriah. The Hebrew Bible asserts Isaac was the sacrifice to test Abraham's faith. Islamic tradition vehemently holds that it was Ishmael on that altar. This isn't just a theological footnote. It is a war for original legitimacy. Believe in Isaac, and you acknowledge Jewish sovereignty over the Holy Land. Believe in Ishmael, and you recognize Islam as the true inheritor of the patriarch's legacy. The spatial conflict Jerusalem, the land Abraham once walked, became the greatest casualty of this split. To Jews, Mount Moriah holds the foundation stone, the holiest site of Solomon's temple, the axis connecting heaven and earth. When Islam rose, They built the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque on those exact same ancient foundations, believing it to be the spot where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven to meet past prophets, including Abraham. When two absolute truths lay claim to a patch of land less than 1 square kilometer, peaceful coexistence becomes theoretically impossible. Controlling the sacred space becomes the ultimate proof of who the true child of Abraham is. The psychology of similarities. Historically, both Judaism and Islam are religions of law and action, unlike later Christianity, which emphasizes faith and grace. They both worship the unseen God, abstain from pork, and practice circumcision. Psychologists call this the narcissism of small differences. Because they are so identical at their roots, they are forced to wildly exaggerate their minor differences to maintain a unique identity. The very existence of the other is a threat to their monopoly on truth. The covenant, originally meant as a global blessing, was turned by his descendants into a real estate contract and a certificate of ethnic superiority. The Jesus fault line. The arrival of Jesus of Nazareth in the 1st century AD wasn't just a religious event, it was a historical collision that altered the family trajectory forever. Jesus and his early followers were devout Jews living under Roman occupation. Jesus didn't intend to create a new religion. He taught in synagogues and claimed to fulfill, not abolish, the covenant. But early Christianity declared Jesus the Messiah. For the Jewish religious establishment, a Messiah crucified by the Romans, a humiliating punishment for rebels, was an insult to God's glory. Supersessionism and anti-Semitism. The tragedy truly began when Paul opened the doors to non-Jewish Gentiles. By dropping strict laws like circumcision and dietary restrictions, Christianity became a universal faith. But the cost was the invention of supersessionism, replacement theology, the belief that the church had replaced the Jews as the new Israel. When Emperor Constantine converted in the 4th century, Christianity went from a persecuted cult to the ruling power of the Roman Empire. The state sword replaced tolerance. The horrific concept of the Christ killer was born, laying the groundwork for 1,500 years of European anti-Semitism. Jews, the children of Isaac, were shoved into ghettos and massacred in pogroms by people claiming Abraham as their father. The rise of Islam and the Holy Wars. In the 7th century, the Prophet Muhammad emerged in Arabia, calling humanity back to the pure faith of Abraham. While Islam respected Jews and Christians as people of the book, the explosive geopolitical rise of the Islamic caliphates directly challenged Western Christendom. By the 11th century, the concept of holy war triggered a global clash. Pope Urban II's call for the First Crusade in 1095 wasn't just about religious zeal. It was a geopolitical masterstroke to control trade routes and export Europe's violent, unemployed knights. When the Crusaders breached Jerusalem in 1099, they slaughtered indiscriminately. Muslims, women, children, and the local Jewish community were massacred in their own places of worship. The blood reached the ankles of men, calling themselves warriors of Christ. When the brilliant Kurdish general Saladin retook Jerusalem in 1187, he allowed Christians to leave safely, a profound historical irony, where the supposed infidel displayed more of Abraham's tolerance than his self-proclaimed heirs. During all of this, the Jews had no army and no state. They were simply the eternal victims caught between the cross and the crescent. The promise becomes a curse. The tragedy entered its most complex and brutal chapter in the 20th century. Ancient scriptures were awakened by the pragmatic calculations of imperialism and modern nationalism. Following the fall of the Ottoman Empire, British and French colonial powers carved up the Middle East with crude borders. The 1917 Balfour Declaration, supporting a Jewish national home in Palestine, ignited a modern clash of self-determination. For Jews fleeing the horrors of the Holocaust in Christian Europe, returning to Abraham's land was the only way to survive. For Arab Muslims, who had lived there for 13 centuries, It felt like a new colonial invasion wrapped in myth. The creation of Israel in 1948 became Independence Day for one brother, and the Nakba, the catastrophe, for the other. The American evangelical factor today. The conflict is no longer a debate over profits. It is a life or death struggle for land, water, and human dignity. Yet, theology still haunts the region. A massive bloc of Western evangelical Christians supports Israel unconditionally, driven by an apocalyptic theology that requires the restoration of Israel for the second coming of Christ. The suffering of native Palestinians, both Muslim and Christian, is often ignored to fulfill a distant metaphysical script. A call for awakening. At the end of our 2,000-year historical journey, a naked truth remains. Abraham's children are still killing each other, not because they are vastly different, but because they share a burning desire for absolute supremacy over the exact same sacred soil. Reconciliation can only begin when the children of Isaac and Ishmael realize that their God does not reside in the stones of temples or the borders of nations, but in the life and dignity of every human being. As long as Jerusalem is viewed as a prize to be conquered, rather than a space to be shared, the blood of Abraham's children will continue to stain the ancient stones. When a grand faith lacks a tolerant heart, it becomes the shortest path to mutual destruction under the guise of the divine. Outro. Understanding the history of Abraham isn't about picking a side. It's about understanding the pain of all sides to find a sliver of hope for coexistence. If this deep dive by Open Knowledge gave you a clearer, calmer perspective on our world, please hit the like button and share this with your circle. Don't forget to subscribe. Individual awakening is the very first brick in building peace. Thank you for watching.